Okay, guys, so today in this conversation, I talked a lot about the four pillars of autoimmunity, which I've outlined in my book, The Autoimmune Revival. And I dive deep on circadian rhythms, I dive deep on chronic infections, I dive deep on toxicity and trauma, and how all of these things play a role in creating a situation where there is immune dysregulation and ultimately autoimmunity in the body. Most importantly, I just want each and every one of you listening to this to realize that there is a reason why you're sick, and there are ways and means to figure out what's actually causing your illness and exactly what you can do about it. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Aquarian Insights. And again, today I am joined by Megan.
Hi.
And we are here to go a little bit deeper into the four pillars of autoimmunity, or what I call the four pillars of autoimmunity. And last time, when Megan and I were discussing, we talked about autoimmunity in general, sort of a new paradigm that's needed.
We talked about his new book, Autoimmune Revival, available on Amazon, free on Kindle Unlimited. Check it out.
You have a very good radio voice.
I do have a good radio voice. I would have loved to be like a disc jockey.
Yeah. So today I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the four pillars and kind of break them down a little bit, but more importantly, give some action steps for each. And when I was preparing for this episode, the funny thing was, because of the depth and breadth of the four pillars, I was like, well, we should do an episode on trauma. We should do an episode on circadian biology. We should do an episode on toxins.
A 4-part series, if you will.
Right. There you go. A 4-part series. But the funny thing with that is part of this paradigm is how all of these things feed off of each other. And so isolating them out defeats the purpose somewhat, right? So we need to not only understand how each four affect autoimmunity, but more importantly, I think, how they all play together. Because the inevitable thing people will say is like, oh, well, all of these things are not necessarily a one-for-one, right? Like if you have a certain type of infection, it doesn't guarantee you're going to get a certain autoimmune condition. But when we start stacking everything on top of each other and seeing the interplay between them, then we can see how these things all build off on each other to create autoimmune conditions.
Sounds good. Let's go.
All right, let's get started. So the reason I created this paradigm for the...
Did you just think of it on your own based off of clinical experience, or were you building it off of someone's framework?
That's a great question. To my knowledge, I built it off my own, and
good job.
Lots of other people have discussed parts of this, but I thought it was important to put it all together. And traditionally, when you look at autoimmunity outside of the conventional paradigm, there's a lot of discussion about diet, there's a lot of discussion about food and nutrition, there's some discussion on infections, even though the research on the correlation between chronic infections and autoimmunity is very, very good and abundant. A lot of people don't talk about it that much. There is a lot of correlation between toxicity and autoimmunity, and that's discussed a little bit.
I thought you were going to say that's disgusting.
No. But putting it all together and understanding how these all fit has really just been a genesis of actually seeing patients and seeing what works, what doesn't, what's important, what's not important, and stacking them all together and seeing how people respond to it. And the reason why I've included these four things is we've seen so many people with autoimmune conditions who've had perfect diets and they've done the detox of the one thing, right? But they haven't addressed everything in totality, and they kind of get stuck. Like they're better, but they're stuck. And so that's really why I wanted to kind of dive deep on this today. because I still maintain that autoimmunity isn't just a random thing. It's not genetics in the way that we understand genetics. It's a predictable response to chronic stressors. And the main chronic stressors are circadian misalignment, chronic toxicity, chronic infection, and trauma. It's important really to understand that these things fit and work together, right? Because certain types of toxicity, especially heavy metal toxicity, work synergistically with infections, for instance, right? If your circadian rhythms are all messed up, that's going to affect your responses and ability to detox, right? If you have a history of severe trauma, that's going to set the stage in the nervous system to become very reactive to things. And so all of these things start stacking on top of each other. So I think it's important to discuss them kind of in totality.
So where do we start?
The best place to start is with circadian rhythms. One, outside of sort of very niche research and very sort of niche clinical experiences, this is still something that's not talked about enough, in my opinion.
Well, they do for babies.
Mm-hmm.
And then it like, after a year, 2 years, 3 years, unless there's like a new baby and then there's a regression, they don't really talk about it after that.
Right. And if you actually look in the research, there's massive amounts of research on circadian misalignment causing all sorts of conditions, including autoimmune disease, including cancer, including all these things. But let's backtrack for a second. So when I say circadian misalignment, I mean that we are not tied to normal daylight cycles anymore.
So let's back it up even more. Define circadian rhythm.
So circadian rhythm is the 24-hour cycle that the Earth goes through and we go through because we are part of the Earth, we are part of our environment, right? And essentially for all of time until very recent history, we've taken our cues from the sun, right? When to get up when the sun comes up, and our body is aligned to the frequencies that come off from the sun and from the Earth. And then when it gets dark, that's when we're supposed to rest and repair and do all those things, and that's a normal cycle. With the advent of modern lighting, electricity, all of these different things, we've sort of started to disrupt these things. And it, especially over the last 100 years, we just get further and further away. And this is important because essentially what we need for our body to function on the level of sort of the biophysics is we need light to come in through the eye, right, from the sun. And that has a master clock in our eye called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a big fancy science term. But essentially that times and primes all the other clocks in our body. So all our organs have clocks, like our gut, our liver, our spleen, all of these things. But importantly too, all of our immune cells have clock genes in them. And so
Weird.
Yeah, it's a little bit funky, right? And so the net effect of that is if our master clock in our eye is off because we're not getting enough sunshine or we're not getting enough darkness at night.
So are sunglasses bad?
Yes.
What about hats?
As long as we can still get natural sun kind of on our skin and on our face. But sunglasses are a good example, right? So we're basically telling the body that it's dark outside when it's actually light outside.
Is that why you get a more severe or worse sunburn if you wear sunglasses versus if you don't?
Absolutely correct. Yes. And
personal experience here, folks. It's bad.
And so basically when these clock genes in our immune cells aren't timed properly, that ultimately means that our immune system is going to misfire. And we're going to have disproportionate responses to things. We're going to have inappropriate inflammatory cascades. We are going to have all of these things happening at the wrong time. And so that's like the meta picture of circadian biology. We have to understand that everything in our body is timed based on a 24-hour. Women also have another 28-day cycle.
That we do.
And all humans sort of have a seasonal cycle, right? So your body does different things in the winter versus the summer, and that's based on the overarching cycle of the sun. Okay. When we get nitty-gritty in things, a couple things become important for immune health. One is melatonin.
There's stuff going around now that melatonin's addictive and bad for you. What are your thoughts?
That's a little bit of a tangential discussion.
Just real quick. True, false?
False.
Cool. Okay. Take your melatonin, folks. It's good for you.
So ideally, how it should work is we get sun during the day. And what that does is gets our pineal gland and our mitochondria.
Which is the powerhouse of the cell.
Correct, yes. To produce melatonin. Now, that melatonin only gets released in high doses at night when it's dark. So basically, darkness is our cue for the body to release melatonin, which sets the stage for better sleep. But also, melatonin is, in my opinion, the most important antioxidant in the body, and it's one of the major control switches for the immune system. Okay, so let's take an example of someone who doesn't spend time outside, right?
Like a shift worker.
Right.
They're asleep during the day, awake at night, in blue light at night.
Yeah, so shift work's a perfect example. You're getting tons of artificial light at night, and you're not getting sunlight during the day. Well, when we're talking about autoimmunity, shift workers have 10 to 20 times higher rates of autoimmunity than people who work regular hours.
So what can they do?
That's a super nuanced, longer discussion. Ideally, avoid shift work.
We'll answer that on a later episode. Tune in next time, folks.
When it comes to shift work, the reality is we have to block as much of the artificial light as we can using blue light blocking glasses and other things when we are at work, and then try and get as much sun during the day as possible, right? And that's not a perfect solution, but it's a better solution. In particular for autoimmunity, when we're talking about melatonin is one of the major things that controls the T regulatory cell activity. And so T regulatory cells are basically one of the main mechanisms the body has to tell self versus non-self. Okay. So if we don't have enough melatonin, we lose some of that control mechanism around that. And at the same time, we get excessive inflammatory responses. And one of the surest, fastest ways to not get enough melatonin released is blue light at night. And so I'm talking about phones, TVs, iPads, all of the fun things that we like to occupy our time before bed are very deleterious for melatonin release, right? And so on the flip side, during the day, when we get actual sunshine, one, we get vitamin D the way that we're supposed to, right? So we're in an epidemic of people taking synthetic vitamin D, trying to replace the effects of the sun. Now, vitamin D is a massive, massive player in controlling immune responses, again, with T regulatory cells. And so when we don't have enough vitamin D, that sets the stage for a whole bunch of different immune chaos. When we combine that with not enough melatonin, we're in a situation where we get these massive inflammatory responses that eventually lead to immune dysregulation, which leads to autoimmunity. And so one of the biggest things we need to do is get our vitamin D up naturally, have darkness at night so we can actually release the melatonin that we're producing. And that's going to help massively regulate the immune system.
So if you could give a prescription for like a proper bedtime routine, assuming they work normal 9 to 5 or they're home during the day or they're not a shift worker doing the second or third shift, what would that look like?
That's a great question. Also acknowledging, too, that if we're going to talk about circadian rhythms, we have to understand that there's seasonality to this.
Correct, yes.
And so if I'm going to try and live in alignment with the normal cycles of my environment around me, that's going to be different depending on where I live and what season it is. And this is also why most people with autoimmune conditions feel better in the summer than they do in the winter. Because even if they're not on purpose trying to get sun and do all of those things, they're just exposed to more sunshine.
It's just there.
It's just there more often, right? Versus when it gets dark at 4 o'clock.
Or noon.
Or, yeah, depending on where you live. So, let's just assume.
Assume they're in Orlando, Florida.
Yep.
On the good day of our Lord, whatever today is.
Yeah, so springtime in sort of the southeast of the U.S. So sun's going down 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And so ideally, we would want to be finished eating by the time the sun, within an hour of the sun going down. Okay? Because not only light, but the food we consume when we consume it is another driver of our circadian rhythms. Okay? So if I'm doing all of the good things and getting sunshine and avoiding screens and whatever, but then I eat a turkey dinner at midnight, well, then I'm basically telling my body it's time to be awake and do all of these things. So that's another lever that's getting messed up. But when we're just talking about light predominantly, is, okay, sun's going down at 8. Ideally, you'd probably want to be in bed between 10:30, which means that we'd want to avoid screens, artificial light, all this stuff, at least an hour before bed. Okay? And then people will say, oh, that's really hard because I got this to do and that to do, whatever. It's like, yeah, I'm giving you what's important if you have a severe autoimmune condition.
Yeah, if you've tried everything else.
Right.
You got nothing left to lose. Try turning everything off.
At bare minimum, you need some form of blue light blocking glasses, not the clear ones, not the yellow ones, the dark red ones that actually block blue light as you're minimizing screen time, right? And at bare minimum, half hour before bed, everything needs to be shut off and needs to have darkness. And at the same time, if I'm avoiding screens and avoiding these things, and then I go to bed and I have a whole bunch of outside light coming in and I have a whole bunch of stuff going on, then that's going to set the stage for disrupted sleep, disrupted melatonin production. So it's any light.
So like night lights?
Yeah. So
should kids have night lights?
There's arguments to be made both ways. I would argue no. And if you need to have one, you can get little red night lights for adults or for kids or whatever, just so you can make your way to the bathroom if you need to.
Would you have it in the room or in like a hallway?
In a hallway. So if we're doing all of this work to avoid excess light at night, and then we go to bed and we have night lights, or we have a TV in the bedroom, or we have a bright alarm clock or whatever, we're kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So that's where we need to be. In addition, when I mentioned food, we want to have it kind of around sunset, right? And so our first meal should be around sunrise, our last meal should be around sunset. That's the easiest way. There is some leeway, but when we're talking about recovering from autoimmunity, that's sort of where we want to be. And then when we wake up in the morning is ultimately just as important because we want to get sunshine within 15, 20 minutes of getting up, and we want at least a half an hour. So if that means going out in the backyard, if that means going on the patio, if that means walking the dogs or whatever, getting outside, getting sunshine in the eyes has a massive effect on the immune system that can't be replaced with anything else.
So you keep talking about sunshine in the eyes. Do contacts affect that?
They do, yeah. So obviously, if you can't see in front of your face, without contacts, you'd want to wear them. But ideally in the morning, if we have the opportunity to be on our patio, our balcony, our backyard, wherever.
Somewhere safe,
without contacts in, so we can get that frequency of light into our eyes, into our body, that is going to be far more important than wearing glasses or contacts or whatever. So we have the melatonin piece, which is sort of the nighttime piece. We have the vitamin D piece, which is the daytime piece. Deeper than all of that, I think we have to realize that all our mitochondria are circadian controlled. So the reason the mitochondria are important is because they power the immune cells, and they also control apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. Okay? And they also repair the DNA. So when the mitochondria aren't working properly because of circadian imbalances, cell death doesn't happen. So we accumulate sort of these cells that aren't functioning properly, which creates a problem for the immune system because we start reacting to these things. And we're not controlling the immune cells well from a level of the mitochondria. Does that make sense?
I mean, as much sense as it's going to make to a layperson.
Okay. One of the things we want to consider with mitochondria too is they essentially control our cellular piggy bank.
Ooh, that's fun.
Right.
What's that?
So our cellular piggy bank, the sort of scientific term is redox balance.
Oh, that's not as fun.
Right. And so basically what happens is to do anything in the body to heal, all the cells in the body need electrons. Okay? And that process is controlled by our mitochondria. When we don't have enough electrons, it's like trying to take money out of your bank account when you don't have money in it.
And you just get hit with the $35 overdraft fee.
Correct. Then you get overdraft fees, and it's a big problem. So if we're going to make withdrawals from our cellular piggy bank, we have to have enough electrons in there.
Now, what counts as a withdrawal? Just like daily activity or like more exertion than normal?
Daily activity, exertion, especially when we get into infections and toxicity, different types of detoxes.
So healing.
Yeah. Anytime you take a medication, anytime you take a supplement, anytime you take a healing food, base level, you need the electrons to do the work.
So what fills the piggy bank?
Light.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Full circle. That's how it works. So when the light-dark cycles get messed up, we have a melatonin problem, we have a vitamin D problem, we have a mitochondrial problem, and the mitochondria stop working properly, which affects our cellular piggy bank. So then all of a sudden that sets the stage for an underpowered immune system that doesn't know how to react appropriately to things, and we get overreactions.
Or no reaction?
Sometimes, but sometimes it's no reaction, but more often than not, if the immune system's trying to build up a head of steam to do something, then it's just going to start lashing out and doing random things. So
okay,
that's why
so all the benign things, people are like, oh, my throat's a little not great, or oh, I'm a little more congested. That's like this
Part of it,
part
yeah.
of it.
So it's like people with autoimmunity who start developing new
Rashes
reactions.
or new symptoms.
Yeah. New symptoms, new reactions, sensitivities to foods, all of these things is because the immune system doesn't have enough energy because there's not good circadian inputs. Now, there's other things that need to be layered in there, right? But at the end of the day, the reason why we start with the circadian rhythm component and the reason why I think this is so important is this is sort of what fills the cellular piggy bank. And so whether I'm doing a detox protocol, whether I'm taking any medications or supplements or whatever, the other factors that are causative in autoimmunity, it's really, really hard to be successful in dealing with those until we deal with the circadian component. We talked about a couple things to kind of do to overcome this and sort of rebalance these circadian rhythms.
I think it would be great if you could recap them just real quickly in like a list.
Number one, sunshine, first thing in the morning for at least 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
The sicker you are, the longer that needs to be. So people will say, I don't have time to do that. Okay. Well, you kind of have to make the time. That's the tough,
You have time to scroll TikTok and all these things and check your email before going out the door. You can do that outside.
In conjunction to that, I would strongly encourage that the first light you see in the morning is not your phone.
So maybe don't do that while you're checking your email and everything.
The first light you see in the morning should be the sun.
So number one, sunlight, 30 minutes. What's number two?
Block artificial light at night.
Okay. So blue light blockers or have it off.
Blue light blockers, ideally very limited electronics. If we need light in the house, using candlelight, using different incandescent red light devices. There's tons of them out there now. Those are better options. Candlelight and firelight's the best. And then we get into kind of red light devices. What we really want to avoid is bright blue lights, bright white lights, especially LEDs. That's where we get into really big problems because it's just so incongruent with our biology for that time of day.
So sunlight first thing, 30 minutes. No blue light at night. Candles are red. Third thing.
No food at least 2 hours before bed. And having a dark bedroom. So when you lay in bed, you shouldn't be able to see your hand in front of your face, ideally. And those are really the main things. And people will say, well, that's too easy or whatever.
Try it for a week, an honest go, and then tell me it's too easy. You'll fail by day 2, but prove me wrong. I would appreciate it.
There are so many more things from a circadian component to do. But what's happened, in my opinion, is we are so far removed from what's natural. And this is so strangely enough foreign to us that until these things become second nature, stacking other things doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Because then we just end up with a whole bunch of things and it becomes tenuous to do. And that's one of the big things when we're talking about interventions and doing things is really try to distill down what are the big levers to pull, what are the important things. Because acknowledging that people have jobs and families and kids and all of these things.
And they're unwell.
And they're unwell, so it's even harder to do. And part of this, especially with the circadian rhythm stuff, is really changing habits and realigning your life to promote healing. Because if I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to rush out the door to go to work and then not getting home till super late or whatever, and I spend all my day indoors, acknowledging how important the circadian component is, we have to have a very long consideration about adjusting things. Because inevitably what happens too is when people try and make these changes is they'll say, oh, well, I have to get up really early for work. I have to go to work and I'm home really late. So I'm just going to go outside at noon. And
For my lunch break, I'll go for a walk.
Right, exactly. Now, the problem with that is when we look at the cycle of the sun, the healing frequencies that we need as human beings come first thing in the morning and come at the end of the day.
So not at noon or 1.
Well, the way that everything's designed is we get healing frequencies and protective frequencies in the morning, and as the sun gets higher and higher in the sky, it changes into more white blue. That gives us energy for the moment, but it's not healing to the immune system because we're designed to do work during the day and rest at night. And then as the sun starts to go down, we get more of those sort of rest, repair, healing frequencies that we really need. And so if I'm only going outside in the middle of the day all the time, that's where people start to get into trouble, right? So we really need morning is best, evening is also good, and then sometime during the day as well, but that's why the morning sunlight is so important. So second to circadian imbalances, we get into the conversation of toxicity.
People have a toxic relationship with the sun.
Nice one. The reason why toxicity is so important is, for better or for worse, in 2026, we are exposed to hundreds of chemicals a day, hundreds of toxins a day that we weren't exposed to for most of history. And when I say toxins, what do I mean? Yeah, I mean chemicals. I mean endocrine disruptors like all the different plastics and fragrances and personal care products and that plethora of goodies that we put on our skin or consume or whatever. But then I'm also talking about heavy metals, so mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, talking about aluminum, talking about mold toxins, mycotoxins, talking about forever chemicals, pesticides, microplastics, nanoplastics, and EMF, or electromagnetic frequencies. Right?
That's a lot of things.
It is a lot of things. And this needs to be discussed because we are living in a toxic soup. And when most people go to their practitioner or to their physician with symptoms, the toxic environment we are living in is not considered. It's just, okay, well, we'll give you this medication or this natural supplement to suppress your symptoms, and let's just forget the fact that, one, you're not getting any sun, but two, let's just forget the fact that all the stuff that you're putting on your skin or all of the things that you've been exposed to have created this toxic soup in your environment and in your body. And that's crazy. We have to address this, right? Most of these toxins our body has no idea how to deal with.
So what does it do with them?
The important thing to consider is some toxins are just like irritants or allergens, but a lot of these things alter immune system regulation and damage immune tolerance long term. And so the immune system loses regulation when your body's full of toxins. And the big thing here too is the reason this is second is when I have specific toxin exposures, it also changes how the immune system perceives threat.
How do you mean?
Well, for instance, the big thing with toxins is toxins form what's called Neo-antigens. And so natural proteins in our body, like in different tissues, like our thyroid or our liver or our spleen or whatever, different heavy metals and other toxins combine with those proteins. Okay. When they combine with those proteins, our immune system goes, hey, that's weird because it's not right, and it starts attacking those neo-antigens, but those look close enough to our own proteins that it starts trying to attack our own proteins. And it's not because the body's attacking itself, it's because we have this toxic load of these new proteins. And so it starts to change how we identify threats, because then all of a sudden anything that kind of looks like that, it's like, oh, that's maybe a problem, or that's maybe a problem, or that's maybe a problem, right? And that is the biggest thing when we're talking about toxins, especially heavy metals, and that's why heavy metals are such a problem. And where do we get them from? Well,
Rice.
rice is, yeah, so we get them from food, right? So from arsenic in rice.
Soak your rice, folks.
Most people get it from dental work. Right? So the silver amalgams we have in our mouth are a constellation or an amalgam of different metals, including mercury and nickel and all these things.
You do a wonderful podcast with Dr. Charles Caprill where you do a deep dive on that. So if you've not listened to that podcast episode, I believe it was episode like 7, give that a listen. It's a good one.
There you go. Yeah, again with the plugs, I like it. Yeah, Dr. Caprill is a wonderful biological dentist, and we go kind of deep into that in that episode. As far as toxins go, yes, there's the chemicals and everything, but I maintain that the heavy metals are sort of the worst thing. One, because of the neo-antigen formation, and two, the heavy metals have a tendency to accumulate in our brain.
That's a problem.
Specifically in our hypothalamus, in our pituitary, and in our brain stem.
Oh, so like the important part.
Right. And this disrupts regulation of hormones. This disrupts growth. This disrupts T regulatory production again, right? So we see all these multiple mechanisms of where the tolerance mechanisms of the immune system are disrupted, right? And so when we stack on, not producing enough melatonin, not getting enough vitamin D, and then all of a sudden I have mercury in my brain and other heavy metals in my brain, and I'm exposed to all these other toxins, well, of course the immune system is going to go haywire, right? But we are all sort of teetering on different autoimmune processes in the body because of these things going on. I think one of the things that's not talked about a lot too is metals cause, on the level of kind of the energetics of the body, metals cause distortion in the light conduction in our body. So we get light from the sun that primes all the clock genes and everything, okay? But also our body produces light. The mitochondria in our body produce light. All the cells produce light, and that light emission is how everything talks to each other. When we have heavy metal toxicity, that interrupts that light communication. So now all of a sudden, the immune system can't talk to itself the way it's supposed to. The nervous system can't talk to the immune system the way that it's supposed to. And we have these disruptions in communication. And so because we have that disruption in communication, we have a disruption in how the body and the immune system responds to things. And I think we have that going on. We have these toxins, which unfortunately are usually present from quite a young age, either because we inherited them from mom and dad, right? So there's a lot of toxin transfer from mom to baby under most circumstances.
How rude.
which is part of the reason why people are more prone to get autoimmunity now than they were 20 years ago, than they were 40 years ago.
Do you think birth order matters? Like the oldest kids have a higher chance?
Yeah. So they've done a lot of studies looking at heavy metals specifically, firstborn tends to get the most.
Oof. Sorry, guys. Well, you're a firstborn. I'm sorry for you.
That's okay. And then each successive child gets slightly less, but there's still maternal transfer. And that sets the stage for a whole bunch of things. And then when we get infections later in life, there is one, loss of immune tolerance because of the presence of the toxins, the heavy metals. But then two, a lot of these metals work synergistically with the infections, right? So a lot of different infections will use the metals as fuel, will use the metals as food, and just sort of stick around because of the presence of the metals, which is why we can't tease these apart, right? Like in clinical practice, like we never just do like an antimicrobial treatment or just do a heavy metal detox or whatever. Everything is going to flow together based on the specific needs of the person. It's never going to be like, okay, we're just doing this and we're going to ignore kind of all of the other stuff. And I think one of the biggest things too is when we're talking about what to do about all these things. A lot of people, when we bring up the toxin conversations, are like, oh my God, everything's going to kill me.
Yeah, so like, what do you do?
First and foremost, before we even get into kind of the low tox lifestyle stuff and removing things, we have to really understand that, yes, toxins are toxins because they have a toxic effect on the body. But the more that they recirculate and stay in the body, the more immune system dysregulation there is, the more nervous system dysregulation is, the more problems there are. And so if our digestion, our liver function, our kidney function, all of those things aren't working properly, and partly not working properly because of the toxic load, but that needs to be corrected. So our body needs to be able to eliminate things so we're just not constantly recirculating things. And then at the same time, focusing on lessening our toxic load over time. And I'm not saying like wholesale replace everything in your house and get rid of everything all at once. If that's what you're called to do, that's what you're called to do.
And if you can financially afford it, do it.
Right. But we need the cleanest water we can drink, right? Because there's a lot of chemicals and pesticides and things in drinking water. We need to really audit our personal care products. We need to remove kind of chemicals and plastics from food and all of these different things so that we can ultimately deal with the heavy metals, right? That's something that typically won't kind of come out on its own accord, but we need to eliminate the plastics, the pesticides, all the other chemicals from our environment that all set the stage for immune dysregulation, and then eventually move towards kind of head-on dealing with the heavy metal burdens and the other metals in our body.
What about chelation?
Yeah, chelation, so long story short, chelation is using different compounds to pull heavy metals or other toxins out of the body. Okay? And this has been used in medicine for a very, very long time. It can be helpful, however, if it's done at the wrong time, it can be very damaging for the body. Okay?
So how do you know when it's the right time?
With the appropriate testing and assessments is the easiest answer I can give. And as an example, we've seen a lot of people in the office who've done rounds and rounds and rounds of chelation trying to get metals out. And what I tell people is, when it comes to toxicity, especially when it comes to metals, low and slow is the name of the game. We've accumulated these things over a lifetime, basically from birth, and we can't just rush to the finish line because then our kidneys get damaged, our gut gets damaged, our liver gets damaged as we try and artificially pull these things out of the body. So the toxicity piece is something that we'll need to do long after our symptoms are gone, right? Long after our blood work has corrected, long after we have overcome our autoimmune condition, because we're still living in the same environment. We're still, unfortunately, it's 2026 and we kind of have to do these things. And that requires diligence and just sort of careful detoxification over time versus trying to fast track it with a whole bunch of chelation. Okay, so we talked about the circadian component. We've talked about the toxicity component. Next thing is infections.
You made it sound dramatic.
I know. When I say infections, I don't mean like the acute cold that disrupts you for a few days and then when you're gone. I'm talking about chronic infections, and that can be from an acute cold or a flu or something like that. But other low-level infections that stay in the body, and they don't always have to trigger an acute crisis. We can just develop these things, and it might be like a scratchy sore throat for 2 days. We don't really think about it. But then because our immune system is already weakened or dysregulated, these things start to stick around, right? Lyme disease is a perfect example. So Borrelia is a perfect example. Bartonella, Babesia, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, parasites, certain types of cell wall deficient bacteria, they all will stay in the body for long periods of time unless they're addressed kind of head on, right? And the inevitable question I get from people is like, okay, well, if these are such a big deal in autoimmunity, why aren't they picked up on lab tests? Why don't people address these things?
Why don't people talk about them?
Right. The problem is, by definition, these chronic infections don't live in the blood, right? So they are going into nervous system tissue, going into joints, going into your thyroid, into your liver, into all of these places where we don't really have a good blood test for. Now, for some of these things, we can test for antibodies, see if there's an immune response there, but that's not always perfect. And so we need other forms of testing to figure this out, right? And the reason why all these types of infections are so important in autoimmunity is because a lot of these different pathogens express similar proteins to our own body's tissue. That's what they call molecular mimicry.
Okay.
So in the immune system responding to the pathogen, it's also going to start responding over time to whatever the tissue is that correlates to what the pathogen looks like. So you start to get a cross reaction to self-tissue.
That's why a lot of rheumatologists are like, it's attacking itself, because like it kind of is.
Right. So the immune system doesn't just randomly choose, be like, you know what, I hate you, I'm going to start attacking you. It doesn't do that. But when we're talking about neo-antigen formation with heavy metals, or we're talking about molecular mimicry with pathogens, it starts attacking the thing that shouldn't be there. And then because of that misinformation, it starts to attack the body's own tissues.
So then how come systemically, when it is doing that, like with swollen joints or rashes, it's not the whole body? It could just be like the very tip of my pinky is swollen and I can't do anything with it, and I know something's going on there, but it's just that spot, and it stays just there until 2 days, and then it's gone, and then it's like it never happened.
So part of that is where pathogens go, okay? And part of that has to do with if I have areas of my body that have been previously damaged, either from an autoimmune flare, from a physical injury, from an emotional injury, from all of these different things, that area is immunosuppressed. And
From scar tissue?
from a biochemical standpoint, it's immunosuppressed.
Oh, okay.
So and physiologically, there's probably less blood flow, there's less oxygen, all of these things. So pathogens will gravitate to immunosuppressed areas in the body. And then the immune system will have a reaction to it at some point. Okay? Now, one of the big things with pathogens too is most of these pathogens live in what's called biofilms. And biofilms and we have good biofilms in the body of all the good bacteria, and our gut microbiome is essentially a biofilm. But all of these pathogenic bacterias and parasites and stuff can form biofilms too, in our gut, in our sinuses, in our mouth.
Mucous membranes.
All the mucous membranes, yes.
Okay, got it.
And the problem with a biofilm is the immune system can't really get into the biofilms. Okay? The analogy that I use, because we have big dogs that like to bark, is when they're looking out the big bay windows in the back of our house and they see a squirrel and they start barking. The dog's the immune system, the squirrel is the pathogen it can't get to. It knows it's there, it can sense it's there, but it can't get to it, right? So like I mentioned before, all the cells in our body work on light conduction communication. Our immune system also recognizes threats through light conduction. And biofilms are light conductive, so all of the different microbes and everything are talking to each other via light. The immune system can sense that. All the different T cells and B cells can sense that, but they can't, the macrophages and everything can't get to the area until we do something to start dissolving the biofilm.
Is that when inflammation occurs?
So let's backtrack for a second. Biofilms can occur anywhere there's an immunosuppressed part of the body.
So they can occur separate from mucous membranes?
Correct. Which is why in severely immunosuppressed people, they become recalcitrant to so many treatments because they have biofilm proliferation in lots of different places you shouldn't have them. Okay? We're talking about sort of that autoimmune inflammation that sort of flares and comes and goes. Yes, that's part of it. Immune system goes, something's wrong, I need to address it, but we also have to understand that the immune system's already dysregulated, already underpowered, already going to overreact because of the other issues on the other pillars. So it's like, well, I can't get to this, I'm just going to scream louder and try and fix it when there's no mechanism to do that, right?
Got it.
And so that's one of the issues. And then what happens is, as that local tissue, let's say synovial tissue, right? Like in Bartonella, synovial tissue gets attacked. That local issue starts to spread over time through something they call epitope spreading, which basically means the immune system's been so active in my pinky finger, it starts being active in all the synovial, even all the synovial tissue in all my joints, even if the issue is my pinky finger.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll save them for a Q&A episode.
I don't know. What do you got?
Well, how come only like one small section? It's not like the whole hand is inflamed. It's localized to just like one joint out of the 57 in the hand. So why is it just the one if the epitope spreading?
Now, epitope spreading can happen. It's not a guaranteed thing to happen. But what we see a lot in autoimmunity is people will say, oh, started off as a thyroid thing, and then it started getting into joints, and then it started getting into gut stuff, and then it started getting into all these other things.
I mean, mine started with one of my toes swelling.
Right. So for you, you're a perfect example. It started as a toe,
My middle toe.
and then you got diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, and then as the dysregulated
But it didn't just stay in the toe.
No. As the dysregulated inflammatory processes continued because the underlying mechanisms weren't dealt with, the immune system starts to go after other things.
Is that the epitope spreading?
Correct.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
The way my brain is envisioning it, yes.
Okay.
We'll revisit this again later.
Sure. What else? Before I move on, because we covered a lot of stuff, what else do you need clarity on?
How do heavy metals cross the blood-brain barrier?
That's a great question. They don't.
But they're in the brain. Do they go
Right.
through, do they backdoor it through, nerves and then ride up?
So
that
axonal
way?
transport, essentially, is the fancy word for them hitching a ride on nerves into the brain.
Is that why most autoimmune conditions are accompanied with some kind of back, neck, spinal pain?
Partly. Partly it's when you have accumulated either infections or toxins in the spine or in the brain, you will get neural inflammation and stiffness in the neck and stiffness in the spine and all those things, which we see a lot, not only with neurological autoimmune issues, but with other autoimmune conditions, right? Like connective tissue ones. So when you think about taking out the sort of thyroid autoimmune things, what are the most common ones?
Connective tissue.
Connective tissue and neurological. So that's going to lead to a lot of stiffness, especially in the spine, especially in the neck. When we're talking about infections, I just want to finish this piece up. When we're talking about infections, this is where we start to see people who get diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. If we go through their history, they had some form of mono when they were a kid. There's potentially a history of Lyme disease. There's some kind of gut infection or travel illness or parasitic infection, right? And that just sort of gets pushed under the rug because they're not showing anything on labs. I would argue even on basic lab work, right? So you do just your complete blood count and your metabolic panel. If you know what you're looking for, you can pick these things up.
And you do discuss that more in the book, Autoimmune Revival.
Yes, absolutely. I spend a whole long chapter on actually interpreting your labs.
It was still right.
Interpreting might not be a word.
Remember, it's on Amazon and free on Kindle Unlimited.
The other important thing, too, we have to understand with lab work when it comes to chronic infections is, so the next level is, okay, well, we'll just test for antibodies, right? We'll test for viral antibodies. We'll test for Lyme antibodies. We'll test for strep and staph and all these things. Antibody level doesn't correlate to activity level of the pathogen in the body.
How do you mean? If it's a high number that comes back, doesn't that mean there's a lot of it?
It means there's a lot of it, but it also does not delineate between live infection, live pathogen,
Or if you've just had it for a long time.
or dead pathogens.
Oh, ew.
So a lot of the time, it's a clearance issue for people in that
You have dead pathogen, but you can't get rid of it?
Correct, because my lymphatic system isn't working properly, my
So
liver's
wait.
not working properly.
If you're testing for antibodies, how are you supposed to differentiate between if it's live and if it's dead and just stuck in the highway that is the body?
So somewhat you can differentiate between IgM, IG,
Based on other blood markers?
yeah,
Okay.
but also clinical history, also physical examination, right? Like if someone has swollen lymph nodes and all these other inflammatory signals just on physical examination, then you can have that better discussion there, right? And one of the things too with autoimmunity is if you're in an active flare or active time of high inflammation, it can actually hide a lot of things on blood work.
A lot of, I mean, myself included, when I was really bad, I always thought it was better to get labs done when I was like in the thick of it. Is that the wrong way to approach it?
Depends on what you run, but also in an ideal world, you'd want to get them done sort of when you're feeling okay, and also when there's a flare
so you
happening.
need like a comparison.
And what'll happen a lot of the times when we're talking about pathogens specifically is when you do labs, I'm not talking about basic labs, but let's say you do viral titers.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people that we've seen, their viral titers are like non-existent when they're feeling okay, and then when they have a flare, their viral titers go way high, right? So they have this chronic viral infection that is somewhat cyclical, that every time they have a flare, the viral titers go up, and then when they're feeling better, they go down, right? So those kind of labs will fluctuate and change, but if we're just talking about a CBC and metabolic, sometimes when you're in an acute flare, it's pushing the immune system in a way that might hide some of the other stuff on basic blood work. So essentially we kind of have to, when you're talking about lab work for chronic infections, it's like, think of it like you're on the highway and
You have a great YouTube video about lab work.
I do?
You do?
Oh.
It's from 3 years ago.
Oh, nice. I didn't know. Who knew? But you got to think about it like you're on the highway and you see an ambulance go by, right? So you know something's wrong, but you don't necessarily know what it is.
No, and you're just hoping everyone's okay.
Right. Which is why we have to dig deeper. We have to look at these titers, look at antibodies, look at functional testing, look at a whole bunch of different things, and put all of the pieces together.
So if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, this is great, I should get some blood work done. Mm-hmm. Without knowing case history, if you were just to give like a general recommendation, aside from a CBC and a metabolic,
so
what are your other like go-tos?
For in general, this is not medical advice, but if we're just talking about infections, you'd probably want to look at EBV titers, so Epstein-Barr, right? Because that is correlated to a number of autoimmune diseases, okay? You want to look at strep titers, which is correlated to a lot of neurological autoimmune diseases. You'd want to look at different Lyme specialized panels to see Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, because those are correlated to a whole bunch of autoimmune conditions. And I think if you did those three, that would be an important first step, not as a definitive diagnosis, but to see how the infection pillar is playing a role. Acknowledging what I said before, that infections and toxins are synergistic together.
Correct.
Which is why we see tons of people with autoimmune conditions that are treated for infections for months or years, but no one's ever touched the toxicity part. No one's ever touched the circadian part. And they don't really get to a place where they begin to overcome the condition until those things are addressed alongside of the infections.
How do you differentiate if it's like a physical injury or an emotional injury that's giving the home to the pathogen in the body?
One, case history, right? Like if people have been in a car accident or had a sport injury or something like that, or or depending on their activity levels, like where are the areas of high stress in the body, if those correlate with where someone is currently experiencing issues, well, then it stands to reason that there's a physical thing there. When you also dig into the case history properly, you can see where different emotional things can come up and how they manifest in the body. So before we get into the trauma part, the emotional part, I think the biggest thing, again, with infections, just like with toxins, is if I start some kind of antimicrobial protocol or start some pathogen remediation protocol of some kind.
Low and slow.
Yes. And if my body is not prepared to release things, it won't. So if my lymphatic system is stagnant, if my liver is not functioning properly, if my digestion is not good, if my pathways of elimination are not good, then I'm going to get a whole bunch of problems, right? So many people take antimicrobials, either medications or natural supplements, and have reactions. And part of the reason they have reactions, assuming it's the right medication for the person, is because their pathways of elimination aren't functioning properly. So that needs to be addressed before any of the antimicrobial protocols. And going back to the circadian part, if I don't have the appropriate amount of electrons in my cellular piggy bank, and I'm trying to get the body to do work, that's going to be a really tough time. All right, last but not least, trauma. Now, I think this is, to me, this is the most important one.
This is my favorite one.
This is your least favorite one by a mile.
It's my favorite for other people. Because it's just, once you, like, get it and you resolve it or you let go, you can just tell right away that, like, the person is just lighter.
When we say the word trauma in 2026, it's come to mean a lot of things
Yes.
to a lot of different people, and it has its own baggage with it.
So let's do a good general denotation, dictionary definition. What is trauma?
Before we go there, what I'm talking about is some unhealed situation that has a emotional component to it that has altered our physiology. Okay, so I'm not talking about stress. I'm not talking about, oh, I had a hectic day at work. It was very traumatic, right? Stress is normal. Stress is important. Physical stress, mental stress, all these things are important. When I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about something, whether it's an event or a recurring thing, that changes a part of us. And it can change our body, it can change our soul, so our mind, will, emotions, and it can change our spirit. There's many mechanisms to that. The part of the reason why the trauma discussions has gotten so strange is because most people don't focus on the body and they don't focus on the spirit, and they just stick to what's going on in the mind. What I want to talk about today to make it actionable for people is talk about trauma's effect on the nervous system, and then downstream to that, the immune system. Because we know that it's our nervous system, specifically our autonomic nervous system, that controls the immune system. Okay? And we know that emotional traumatic events change the autonomic nervous system. Okay? So we think about the nervous system basically as like the bridge between our mind, will, and emotions in our body. Okay? So if that gets messed up, we are going to manifest physical symptoms. I think one of the biggest things too is there's lots of different trauma systems out there, right? And ways to recover from it and all of these different things. Part of my issue with a lot of these things is the emphasis on working through your trauma. So in someone with autoimmunity who already has an increased perception of threat internally and externally, you're basically telling people to constantly be aware of new threats because you're constantly searching for uncovering more and more traumatic things. And it becomes sort of this endless quest. And I've just seen multiple people go down this rabbit hole in an unstructured way of trying to, quote unquote, constantly work through their trauma, whether they're dealing with the other four pillars or not, constantly working through their trauma. And it creates a real problem for the nervous system, for the immune system. And at the end of the day, part of healing from emotional trauma is feeling safe.
You don't really feel safe if you're constantly reliving it.
Correct. And so there are beautiful, simple ways of rewiring the nervous system, of overcoming these traumatic events. Also acknowledging that the other pillars have to be addressed as well, right? Because if they're not, well then the parts of my brain that are changed and adjusted from trauma are also changed and adjusted from toxicity, from infection, from all of these things, and it becomes sort of this downward spiral. But again, what I wanted to focus on was this dysregulated autonomic nervous system component to the trauma discussion. Because the reason that dysregulation occurs is usually from emotional trauma, and that trauma is usually from childhood. And what happens is it gets imprinted in the limbic part of our brain and basically starts running these programs that bypass our frontal cortex, our neocortex. So bypasses our thinking brain and becomes these subconscious programs. And so part of what we talked about last time in recovering from traumatic things is you experience the same thing again, but you don't react the way that you used to because you've eliminated that subconscious limbic-based response to the thing. In this frame, it's important to consider that trauma is not something that's actively remembered all the time. Most people who've had traumatic experiences, like truly traumatic experiences,
They don't remember it.
not at all, right? And there's ways of bringing them to the conscious mind again, if that is necessary. But these subconscious programs get relived daily by the autonomic nervous system over and over and over again. And what that does is ramps up the sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system. So we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, right? Like the fight or flight and the rest and digest. And so we get this massive amount of sympathetic stress from the trauma, which starts to change our immune system because we start to think everything is a threat. So that when I encounter toxins, foods, pathogens, I become more reactive to these things because of those original traumas. And on the flip side too, when we get to a place of trying to get rid of toxicity, trying to get rid of infections, all of these things, if my body is holding on to traumatic experiences, most of the time I'm not going to be willing to let go of the toxins or the infections or whatever else my body is holding on to until I can let go of that trauma. So when I say imprints in the limbic system, that is a physical thing, but it's also an energetic thing, right? So there's an energetic imprint that stays and starts to interfere with cellular communication, that starts to interfere with self-recognition, trying to delineate between self and non-self. And so even if you get rid of all of the other things from all the other pillars, if you still have these imprints of unhealed trauma, then it's going to set the stage for stuff to reoccur. And I would make a very strong argument that symptoms, autoimmune symptoms, are the body's way of trying to resolve conflicts. So I have these emotional traumas that are stored in my subconscious that, depending on where, are going to affect certain parts of my body. And then my body is going to, over time, bring up physical symptoms to remind me either of the event or remind me that I need to pay attention to something. And part of that is every organ system in the body correlates to certain emotions. And this has been known for thousands of years in all different medical systems, from Chinese medicine to Ayurveda to all the different ones. And so when certain organs are affected, there's an emotional component that ties back to some kind of traumatic event. And so our body is, when we have these autoimmune symptoms, our body is trying to get us to bring that to our conscious mind so that we can actively resolve it. And it's worth noting too that, yes, early childhood trauma is very, very important. In utero trauma is also important. Generational trauma can happen as well. You can get things passed down. We've seen it time and time and time again in clinic. You can also have societal trauma, right? Like you think about
9/11 or
9/11,
big.
World Wars, COVID, all big ones. One of the things that becomes important for a lot of autoimmune patients is medical trauma.
How do you mean?
So if you go to a doctor and say something's wrong, I don't know what's wrong, but there's a problem, and they say you're fine, your labs are fine, nothing's wrong with you, and you're basically gaslit to thinking that you're crazy or whatever, that is a very traumatic experience. And you start to not trust your own body. And there starts to become a disconnect between my perception and what I'm being told is the truth. And all of these different types of traumas lead to immune confusion, right? Because the body starts saying, okay, I don't know myself from not myself. And I'm of the opinion that you can get 80% of the way there, but you can't get 100% there until this part of everything is reset. Which is why people have success with circadian protocols, which is why people have success with detoxes and stuff, but it's not quite there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, doing this requires a specific mindset of and willingness to not continually relive traumatic things for the sake of doing it, but acknowledging that this plays a role in your health and finding ways and means and different techniques and therapies to help with this component of things. Because a lot of times what happens even before we get to a full-blown autoimmune diagnosis is we have these traumatic events that are stored in certain parts of the brain that affect the autonomic nervous system that start changing our function of our vagus nerve. Okay? And our vagus nerve controls our heart, our digestion, all of our organs. So a lot of times when we dig into clinical histories with people, histories of digestive distress, cardiovascular issues, all of these little things that have been trickling and bubbling underneath, oftentimes precede a full-blown autoimmune flare by months, years before, right? It's because there's been a change to the autonomic nervous system because of these traumas. And at the same time, traumatic experiences activate the immune system in the brain. So that we have cells in the brain called microglia, and they basically are the brain's immune cells. And with persistent trauma or very traumatic events at some point in our life, we have this chronic activation of the microglia that creates a lot of inflammation in the brain, and it also creates a heightened threat perception to everything. And so, yes, a lot of times people will say, okay, well, we have to take things to decrease inflammation in the brain, all of these different things. But if we work on resolving the trauma, then the immune system within the brain can begin to calm down and reset, rather than just trying to put a Band-Aid on the whole situation, right? And just like we talked about kind of in the circadian component, trauma can fundamentally disrupt the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus talking to the pituitary, talking to the adrenals, right? So the thing that kind of controls our hormones.
HP. Got it.
You got it, right?
I got it.
And so trauma in and of itself can flatten cortisol rhythms, can disrupt melatonin production, and we get into really big issues with thyroid hormone, with estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, because of this disruption of the HPA axis, because of trauma. And all of these things are intricately involved in our immune system function. I think, too, once we get on a deepest level when we're talking about trauma, is our immune system's main function is to distinguish self from non-self. The biggest thing with trauma is it disrupts that delineation. And we stop being able to trust our own body. We stop being able to recognize what's us, what's not us. Because a lot of traumatic experiences get pushed to the subconscious, which literally means a part of us gets pushed away from ourselves. And until those things are reunified, it's going to create a massive schism in our ability to delineate what's us and what's not us. And a lot of people will say, well, trauma is just sort of an adjunct to autoimmunity. It's not really a main driver. And I would argue it absolutely is a main driver, probably the main driver. And because of this delineation between self and non-self. Now, am I saying everyone has to jump into deep, intense trauma work and everything right away? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. We need to establish a baseline of safety first, right? We need to establish an ability to regulate our nervous system better. So things like emotional freedom technique or different tapping techniques can be very, very helpful. We need to establish proper breath work again, because when my sympathetic nervous system is chronically high, that changes how I breathe, that changes kind of how I move, all of these different things. So having those processes in place. We also have to have predictable routines, ideally, and ideally that are circadian based. have to really be careful with what we think. Well, what I mean by that is when we have subconscious trauma programs, by definition, they're subconscious, right? We don't know what's going on. But as we build out an environment of safety within us and around us, we may not know why, but we can start to recognize, like, oh, that was weird. Why did I react to that person like that?
Yeah.
Right? And you don't have to know why. You don't have to seek to solve it right away. But it's like, oh, that's interesting.
It's like, I'll file that away to see if I do it
right.
next time.
And some of it can just be as simple as tracking symptoms. Like, oh, every time I talk to my mother-in-law, I get an autoimmune flare.
Oh, I know. I'm kidding. Mine's the greatest. She's lovely.
Or, every time I have to be put in this situation again, my immune system acts up, or whatever it is. And so first just kind of auditing that and tracking that, which is why at the beginning of my book, The Autoimmune Revival, so much of it is actually just tracking symptoms. Without judgment, without anything. It's just like, okay, when X, Y, and Z happens, this increases it. When it comes to trauma, I think a lot of things can get nebulous, but it's important to recognize that traumatic experiences get stored in certain parts of the brain and the nervous system, which alter the autonomic nervous system, which changes how the immune system functions. And most of the time, until those things are attended to, the immune system dysfunction will persist. And the net effect of it is there's a separation from self from non-self. So we don't know which is which. And everything becomes a threat. And so until we diligently and earnestly deal with these things, it becomes very problematic. And again, you can't, in my opinion, you can't fix anything in isolation, right? Because if you've had traumatic experiences, all of that's going to disrupt your circadian rhythms because sleep's going to be difficult.
Because you're going to be staying up all night thinking about it.
Right. Toxins worsen infections. Infections feed off toxins. Circadian misalignment blocks repair. All of these things play together, which is why it was so important for me to discuss all these things together rather than trying to pull them out. Obviously, there's a lot more to this whole conversation, and we could absolutely do a deep dive on any of these for sure.
If you want that, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, hey, let us know. I also think the Autoimmune Revival is a very good resource. We have the book, and we also have the free course that kind of guides people through all of this.
And where can they find the course?
Course is on the website, aquarianhealthsolutions.com. So, long story short, there is absolutely definable reasons why someone has autoimmunity.
Mm-hmm.
It's never usually just one thing. In rare occasions it is. But it's never just one thing. And you need to work with somebody who can delineate out all of these things. And I think more importantly, too, be willing to go to these different places. Because when it comes to the 4 pillars, in my experience, everyone has one or two of them that they're willing to go all in on.
And then one that they won't touch with the 78,000 foot pole.
Correct. I mean, even for you.
Yeah, 78,000
it
foot
took me
pole.
years. Now, also, we should acknowledge that symptom-wise, sort of long done and dusted, but there were things in your sort of trauma history. There were things from a circadian standpoint that you could do better.
Still could do better, if we're honest here, guys.
And it took a while to kind of get around to those things. And that's okay. And the biggest thing I want people to realize is healing is absolutely possible if we attend to these things but it's also not an instant quick fix. And when we take into account, especially trauma history for people, if it's taken since birth for these trauma processes to start affecting you physically, the beautiful thing is it's not going to take, if it's taken 30 years, it's not going to take another 30 years, but it's not going to happen overnight, right? And the important thing is just to acknowledge that all of these things go into creating a situation where there's immune dysregulation, which creates autoimmunity. And in order to unravel that, we need to address all of them at the appropriate times.
Well, guys, if you liked that show, give us a follow, like and subscribe, leave us a comment, give us a rating. All of that goes a long way. If you are interested in presenting your case to Dr. McLaughlin, if you feel he could help you in any manner, drop us a line at aquarianhealthsolutions.com. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube at Aquarian Integrative Health.
Yes.
You can also get the book, The Autoimmune Revival, on Amazon. It is free on Kindle Unlimited.
Thanks, Megan.
We'll see you next time.